Thank you all for joining us. I see that we have a few people in the joining us in the chat, and I'd like to start off by having everyone introduce themselves. So once again, Tim, if you could give us a quick introduction.
Sure, Camilo. Hi everyone. First of all, we're not experts in live streaming on Zoom, that's for sure. So I don't envy you, Camilo, having to coordinate and manage all this. So thank you very much for bringing us all together. My name is Tim. I'm the Educational Technology Coordinator here at the American International School in Abu Dhabi. Part of my role would be looking at some of the, well, no, not in the latest, but looking at technology and how it can support our teachers when it comes to having a meaningful impact on teaching and learning. What is drawing me to this specific technology in this tool is actually the idea that it could support our teachers with a heavy workload. A lot of technology we look at is to improve learning, which is absolutely amazing. But I think this technology tool could be leveraged to support our hard-working teachers. So great to be here, Camilo, and thanks again.
Thank you, Tim. James, could you give us a quick introduction?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Camilo. My name is James Steinhoff. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Information and Communication Studies at University College Dublin in Ireland. And I work in the political economy of media, especially artificial intelligence. So I'm interested in the industry that forms around these technologies like AI, and the social and economic impacts they have. So thanks for having me.
Excellent, James. Thank you. And John.
Thank you, Camilo. My name is John Mikton. I'm at the International School of Geneva, the Châtaigneraie campus. I'm the Technology for Learning Coordinator, working with pre-kindergarten to grade 4 students, doing a makerspace in digital literacy. And prior to that, I was an IT director and deputy principal in different international schools. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And Camilo, thank you for getting us all together and smoothing the technical glitches. It's great to see everybody tonight. A great conversation to be had.
Thank you, John. And so I've been an educator for about 20 years, more than 16 years. Most recently, I was a technology coordinator here at the American School of Valencia in Spain. And throughout my professional career, technology applied to teaching and learning has been a great passion. And in the last few years in particular, I've been more and more interested in the role that artificial intelligence plays in our societies and also in the classroom. So it's a really exciting opportunity to be able to be speaking with Tim, James, and John tonight, and having everyone join us from different parts of the world, from what I'm seeing in the chat. As Tim mentioned, we all know, as educators, we all feel like there are certain aspects of our daily lives that could be enriched and benefited by different technological tools. So the first thing I want to just sort of come out and put out in the open is, although I do want to be sort of open about my sort of skepticism about artificial intelligence in certain aspects of the teaching and learning process, I definitely do not want to come off as being anti-technology at all. We all understand that using technology in the teaching and learning, in our teaching and learning practice is enormously beneficial. And we of course understand, I think all of us, that using these tools also in administrative tasks and in many other aspects of education and in education organization and administration is obviously very beneficial. But having said that, with the release of ChatGPT, I noticed that there was an immense amount, an almost overwhelming amount of enthusiasm for this particular tool. It's something that in my roughly 20 years overall of experience in education, I don't think I've seen. I remember personally being very enthusiastic and very excited when Google released Google Apps originally. And being able to collaborate in the cloud in real time was a very exciting thing. And I think we could all think of other tools and other technologies that have been released in the past 2 decades that have caused a great deal of enthusiasm. But if I'm not mistaken, I believe that ChatGPT reached a certain threshold of millions of users faster than any other technology that has been released in the last 20 years or so. It broke all kinds of records, and all of us who were playing and experimenting with it probably realized that it was crashing continuously because of the amount of people that were trying to use it and experiment with it. So I was immediately captivated and interested in how much enthusiasm this tool was generating. And we released a survey in our through Twitter and on LinkedIn, and using the answers in that survey from those of you that were kind enough to participate and answer those questions, and also by sort of gauging and reading what was being posted online and in different blogs and in different news outlets, I think we could say that there are two main categories that most people are enthusiastic about. The first one being teaching and learning. And what I have been able to see, and it was interesting to see it in the survey, a lot of teachers believe, or at least expressed, that tools like ChatGPT demonstrate that traditional methods of education are entirely outdated, and that this kind of technology makes it ever more urgent that we give more space to critical thinking and creativity. The other sort of area that I was able to sort of gauge was of interest to most educators was the ability of improved research through tools like ChatGPT. The other aspect that seemed to be on everybody's mind, of course, was administrative tasks, like the amount of onerous, tedious tasks that could be replaced by tools like ChatGPT. And in particular, the feedback that we got in the survey specifically mentioned three things particularly: the time it takes to plan, the time for preparing reports, and giving back feedback. This was interesting to me because it raised additional questions beyond the questions of AI, which we won't necessarily have time to get into right now in this brief little introduction. But it was interesting to me that teachers felt that planning was an unnecessary or a tedious aspect of their educational of the teaching and learning practice. I thought that was very interesting. It also really caught my attention that they would be interested in using ChatGPT to give back feedback, so-called personalized feedback. And just as a quick parenthesis, one of the things that maybe we can talk about in the open discussion session, because I'm really interested in this, is how the definition of words change when certain media and technology are introduced into society, and the effects of what technology have done to the word personalization is particularly interesting in this context, because we're talking about personalization of education when apparently, if the teacher is using ChatGPT to generate the plan and ChatGPT to generate the feedback, and students are perhaps using ChatGPT to produce the work, then it seems to me that we've removed people from the equation almost entirely. So that was just a very interesting thing to see how the word personalization was being used. But by and large, we have those two categories. For the first one, the first sort of questions that I'd like to discuss this evening, in terms of teaching and learning and the use of technology tools to promote them and develop them in the classroom, I think we would all agree that critical thinking is important, and increasingly so, perhaps. Although I think it's always been important. But okay, let's say that it's even more important now than in the past. I think we would all agree. Creativity, I think we could all agree, is essential as well, and an essential, perhaps inseparable component of, or rather, a companion of critical thinking, and soft skills as well. I don't think any educator would argue that those are three things that need to be developed in the classroom. The question I'd like to just sort of put out there is, don't we already do that? And if we're not doing that, is it a technological problem? Is that a technological problem, or is that a social, political, and educational problem? If we are not, if as educators we feel that we are not developing critical thinking, creativity, and soft skills enough, is the solution a technological one? Like, will something like artificial intelligence help us do that? That would be, one of the first questions that I'd like to throw out there. And just to sort of close this introduction segment, I want to posit just two branches of research that have been carried out in terms of how technology is affecting our work as educators. The first from Yong Zhao, who in a great book that I would recommend everyone to read, Never Send a Machine to Do a Human's Job. He starts off in the introduction by just plainly stating that there's no research that has so far demonstrated that teaching and learning itself is improved by the simple incorporation of technology. And I think people like Tim, like John, would probably agree with Yong Zhao and with myself in the sense that, yeah, normally if you just throw tools into the classroom, that's not going to be enough. There has to be PD. There has to be a changing of mindsets. It has to be accompanied by what you're going to apply the technology to. It's not just throwing stuff into a classroom and hoping that suddenly everyone becomes creative and critical thinkers and all that. I think we understand that, but I think it is interesting that the research does sort of show that something is happening, because schools are investing a great amount of money in technology. But we as educators, we seem to feel like we're not quite getting to develop those skills and those competencies that we would like to see developed. The OECD, that organizes the PISA international exams, has also conducted research reaching very similar conclusions. And then in terms of automation and freeing time up for educators to actually be focused on developing these skills, interestingly, and even without sort of looking at the research on this topic, I think we could all agree that in the last 20 years, we've all been given access to a great deal of technological tools, and yet we all still feel like we don't have enough time for the things that we would like to be doing with our students in the classroom. And then, of course, the research seems to back this up. The more automation there is, the more work there seems to be. And that's an interesting sort of contradiction that I think is important. So having said that, and having sort of laid out these these issues that sort of prompted this conversation for this evening, I'd like to hand it over to Tim, and perhaps he can share with us a little bit about how he sees the opportunities and the possibilities for us as educators to be able to incorporate these tools critically and productively. So Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Camilo. Yeah, just to pick up on a few points you made there, there's definitely, I've never seen such enthusiasm around, I'll call it an educational technology tool, around a technology as we've seen in the last, when you think about it, it's just the 1st of February, let me check, yes, 1st of February. So really the last month, there's been so many conversations. My social media feeds are just full of ChatGPT. It's almost a bit overwhelming. Well, it is a very overwhelming. But then I was trying to think, not so much why, but I was also thinking, you mentioned when Google first came out, when the iPad came out back in 2010, we are living in a society where everyone's connected, everyone's got an opinion, everybody's willing to share. So I do think that has amplified it to a certain extent. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely massive enthusiasm there, but I think because we're living in a world where it's easy to find people's opinions, to share opinions, to comment, to have dialogue, I think it has been amplified there, but that doesn't mean I have not seen anything like it when it comes to the actual technology. And then to pick up on your point then, I mean, the iPad was introduced to schools in California in 2010, and it hasn't really had a big massive impact as you would have expected it to have done in close to 15 years. Why that is, for me, potentially we've just thrown technology into classrooms, we've thrown technology into teachers' hands, and we expect that to be the magic answer. I am a firm believer, if you invest in hardware, software, you need to invest the same amount in training. You can't just give people a device, and then you need to almost, it's a good ballpark figure to invest the same, whether it's training, whether it's giving them free time off their schedules to explore that technology. And it'll be the same for a technology like this then. To go back to our place here, American International School here in Abu Dhabi, we were exploring the idea of AI and especially ChatGPT before Christmas. Okay, we went away, and there's just a handful of us. Your fans of technology in general, on a personal level and professionally as well. And then we came back over Christmas, and we were pretty much a week ahead of everyone in the academic year. So we were back. Our first day of school this calendar year was the 2nd of January, and within an hour and a half a dozen people have come up to me and said, "Oh, have you seen or heard of ChatGPT?" People who would not normally come up to me to talk to me about technology. And then it was almost people coming up to me in the corridor, and I was like, ChatGPT, and it was, I've never ever seen anything like that. First day back, when it's normally you're talking about vacations and holidays and what you've done. So we thought that as a small tech team, leadership team, to get ahead of it, we need to, let's see, possibly addressing it with everyone. I'm a big fan of exploring new technologies. I love things that kind of disrupt a little bit, get us out our comfort zones, make us think what we're planning on doing, what we're doing. It keeps us on our toes, especially people who are in roles similar to mine. So then we just got together, a small group of people who had been exploring it anyway. Call it your digital champions, your digital leaders. They're change agents in the school anyway, so they were the ideal people just to explore it. So we hung tight on it. So it was almost, we had to calm people down to begin with, and you never have to do that. And John knows, when you're rolling technology out, you want enthusiasm, but this was the opposite. Because, and if I'm being honest, it's because I didn't know enough about it. I was like, where's this data been stored? Why is it asking for our phone number? What is it doing? Do you know what I mean? Can we push this to students? Is it 13-year-old and above? Is it 18? All of these things we didn't know, that we couldn't just go and say, here you go. So in our role, we'd have to do our due diligence on any technology. And this, for me, I had to put that hat on. This is another technology, be it iPad, be it Google Classroom, be it Padlet, be it VR, AR, right? What would you normally do? And you would have a small group pilot it. You'd have a small group explore it, and you'd expand that group. You start doing training and stuff like that. So that's where we are. We're on that journey. There's so much out there to read up on it. It's hard to keep up to date almost. It's updating. Only today I saw, let me get the name right because it's that new, OpenAI have released AI Text Classifier, which is their own tool for checking if anything's machine generated. So what we have done is we've spoke to staff and raised awareness of this tool. So they aren't thinking this student has come back after Christmas break and all of a sudden is banging out 500-word essays, in the words of William Shakespeare. But it's that we need to be aware that this technology is out there. And what we have done then is we've explored tools we already have to help monitor it. So we use Google Docs. So you can use version history in Google Docs. So our students just copy and paste in 500 words for a 500-word essay. Well, we're not saying it's not their work, but we need to possibly have conversations around it. That how this, I hope, was going to change education. Okay, how it does that, and whether we're going to be, as we've always been in education, slow to change. But something has to be done, okay, around assessment, around teaching. If a student can just copy and paste an essay, possibly then we need to reflect on, then there's something wrong with the actual assessment. But that's where we are. We're so lucky with the community I'm in. There's people who are open to it. I didn't have to put people in a room to discuss this. It was already happening. So we are just having conversations, and we're facilitating those conversations about how it can be used.
Those are some really interesting points, Tim. Thank you for sharing. And sort of in the same frame, in terms of applications and impacts on schools, John, if you could maybe share what your perspective is in terms of perhaps some of the planning and some of the challenges, the logistical issues, just walk us through what you are seeing, hearing, and what you're thinking in terms of what schools should maybe start doing to avoid the risks and to sort of take advantage of the opportunities.
Yeah, I think, ChatGPT has kind of generated two camps. And I think the one camp that Tim was describing, the people that were very enthusiastic, really see it as a value-added proposition and kind of rolled up their sleeves and dug in and suddenly saw there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of things that it can do. Going by the survey, the biggest thing was workflow, report cards, administrative tasks, maybe even lesson planning, or maybe translating lesson plans into different languages. So I think there was a lot of enthusiasm. Then I think for maybe educators that are more tied and more committed to a content-driven curriculum where they've been working with a certain approach and questions and essays and prompts that they're really tied to, this makes it a little more uncomfortable. And I think they suddenly realize that there is a significant shift. And what we've seen in some school districts, not in international schools as far as I know, but definitely in certain countries, it's been quickly, let's shut this thing down, let's control it until we get a handle over it. And we know that approach generally doesn't work. I think, there are a whole group of teachers that maybe don't even know about it, or they haven't really delved into. I think in the context of a primary school, maybe it's not as prominently engaged with as much as in the high schools. I know that in our current context, in our foundation, we have 3 schools. The high schools have had staff meetings, there are working groups, they're really unpacking what that looks like, trying different prompts, understanding some of the maybe limitations, but also some of the opportunities. I think where the discomfort comes is that when something that's so revolutionary and really comes to the heart of teaching, if you are somebody that has over years got a closet full of key questions and key prompts and key content-driven pedagogic approaches, this can become quite humbling. This becomes a bit of a challenge. And I think what schools maybe want to consider and something to invite themselves to think about is, what is the value-added proposition of a school and a learning pathway when you have something like ChatGPT? What is it that we bring to the table, to our students, to the parents, to our faculty, to our communities, that ChatGPT 3 doesn't? And I think we really need to give ourselves the permission and time to unpack that. And that value-added proposition has to be very clear, and we need to make sure we're amplifying it. Because if the value-added proposition is that we get your kids to practice a lot of exams and get good results, well, we're seeing with ChatGPT, it could do a percentage of that quite effectively. So I think that's something really to unpack is we have these learning pathways, we have this curriculum, we have a pedagogic approach. What is our value added when we have something like ChatGPT or DALL-E 2, and there are more going to come out, and you can already see the landscape is becoming much more populated with other alternatives. So I think that's one question. Having worked with parents and talked to parents, there's a lot of questions about plagiarism. Is that cheating? There's a lot of gray. Is AI considered as a source or not? How does that play out when students are writing essays? Does it really matter if a child gets an outline from ChatGPT and then spends time, developing it on their own? Is there anything wrong with a child putting an essay in ChatGPT and asking it to correct it or give it more focus on a certain area? So these questions, I think, are all really complex and nuanced. The one thing that we have to give ourselves permission is for everybody in schools. We need time. Everybody needs time. We know the change process. Everybody comes to it with different dispositions, different values, different expectations. And we really need to make sure we differentiate that process of giving people time to really look at this and also support our parents. I think there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of perceptions that are just jumping with limited really understanding. I think everybody should spend 2-3 hours trying it and seeing it, try it with a group of people, with parents, and really kind of unpack this. It's a bit like when you get a new bicycle or you get a new car or a new set of skis or whatever it might be. It takes time. And I think we as school leaders and my role as an ed tech person, I think my responsibility is what am I doing to scaffold and create the spaces, time, and the opportunities for people to engage with this at the pace and with their capacity and what they have available with everything else they're doing. And I think if we do that, we'll be much better prepared because there is a value-added proposition to this. There's also a dark side, and I know very likely James and Camilo will talk again. Let's remember, OpenAI is owned by a very small group of people that have a lot of money. It's not like every Tom, Dick, and Harry is going to be starting making foundational AI. This requires a lot of money, a lot of computing power, and a lot of resources. So I think on the ethical level, there are some things that we need to be mindful of. What does it mean when this kind of power is held within maybe 4 or 5 big tech companies that have a very different process for check and balances and feedback and monitoring? So a lot of questions. I'm not bringing a lot of answers, but I think the one thing is let's give ourselves permission to find out what is the value-added proposition that we bring to the education landscape as a school, as a community of learners, and how does ChatGPT enhance that? How can we leverage it? And then giving ourselves time and space to make sure we support all the different members of our community, however they're interpreting this and wherever their comfort level is.
Thank you. Thank you for that, John. And before we move on to James, I'm going to use this. There's a segue here, I think, with a comment that I just read in the chat from Santiago. He says, in reference to needing time to be able to assess this technology, he says, well, the problem is that there isn't really enough time. This just came on us, like a wave, and we need to react to it. And
can I challenge you on that?
Sure, absolutely.
I think we need to understand AI is not something new. There was a ChatGPT before ChatGPT 3. I think there has been a bit of and I'm going to be very provocative here. I think AI has been around. I think many people like Tim and myself and many of our colleagues have been aware of it. Maybe we didn't know the impact of it, but I think we have to be careful with the ethics and AI. It's been around. I think schools have not made it a focus, and schools have maybe not given the opportunity to really delve into it. And I think we have to be careful to say, oh, there's no time, it went too fast. I think we need to also do some self-reflection. What are we doing to scaffold opportunities for people to be aware of these technological changes that have such a societal impact? And how are we creating venues for people to learn about them, understand them, and also schools do self-reflection on what is the impact? So I agree there's no time, but I think we also have to be conscious that this is not something that's brand new.
Absolutely. No, I think we would all agree with that. I think the issue of time though is important in terms of and relevant in this situation for two reasons, and then we'll jump in with James. One of them is, yes, of course, AI and these kinds of tools similar to them, not with quite the same impact as ChatGPT, but similar, have existed for a while. But within a school, and Tim and John would probably agree with this, it's hard to carve out the PD time for all of the different needs that we all as educators have and school administrators have. I'll give you a quick example. Here in Spain, there was actually, I think it's common for the whole European Union. There's been new legislation passed that makes it a requirement for teachers to have accredited certain digital competencies. This doesn't affect private schools and international schools, but it affects everyone else. But there's similar situations in private schools as well. What this means, what this translates into, is that teachers are right now overwhelmed with training for other aspects of other aspects of educational legislation that has changed, on top of the accreditation, the formal accreditation for these digital competencies. In the middle of that context, every single teacher in Spain is now suddenly overwhelmed with the possibility that their students are using ChatGPT. They haven't been trained for it. There's just all sorts of anxiety, and in that sense, I think the issue of time is important, because I think we all understand that in schools there are so many competing interests for like PD time. Like, it's so hard to carve out the PD time that we need for any number of things. So I think it is a fair thing to sort of keep in mind. Having said that, though, there is an aspect of ChatGPT that I think is interesting to dive into, and maybe James can help clarify, which is sort of to give us a background, a sort of simplified background, if you will, not like necessarily an engineering type detail, but what are technologies like ChatGPT doing in the background? What is it that these tools do? Oh, James? Okay, so while James figures out the whatever technical issue is going on, I'll just give a little more some more context to that. When I was doing my own experiments with it, when I was
James,
there he is. James is back.
Yes, I'm back. Sorry.
So we were just wondering if you could maybe walk us through some of the technical aspects of what tools like ChatGPT are actually doing, sort of behind the curtain.
Yeah, absolutely. So, would you let me share my screen for a minute here? I actually have a few slides.
Absolutely.
So I'm a big fan of what everyone has empirically proven to be wrong, which is loading slides full of too much information.
Actually, James.
Or does that not work on the webinar format? I'm not sure.
It does, but
I'm worried, Camilo. If you change host, it may kick us out. Possibly,
anyways,
James.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, that's all right. I can provide. I could share some slides after for if interested people would like them. But anyways, so yeah, so ChatGPT is what's called a large language model, which is a quite new development. And I'll read a definition here from a recent paper, which I quite like. And they say that a large language model is a statistical representation of a language which tells us the likelihood that a given sequence, which is a word or a phrase or a sentence, occurs in that language. Now, this simple capacity can be used to do a bunch of things. Most notably, it can be used to make predictions about how a sentence might end, or in general, how a series of characters might follow another series of characters, right? Now that can be as simple as, typing in, say, like, it was a dark and stormy, and statistically likely output would be night, probably, right? Or something such. So it's a statistical predictive model trained on huge amounts of text data scraped off the internet, publicly accessible sources, primarily. But also, I mean, I don't exactly know what this data set is. I think they've actually disclosed it in this case, because there are criticisms about previous large language models being sort of secretive in what they're actually trained on. So what's exciting about this is that it's generative, or it has the capacity for emergence, in which, unlike a traditional computer program, which does what it's told to do, and what is more or less what's going to happen, with this sort of thing, you don't know what it's going to output. So they often, in the technical literature, will call this inducing rather than merely computing, because you set up the parameters, but you don't know exactly what it's going to output. And this is the source of the excitement of these things. You tell it to put out an essay on the Copernican revolution, and it can, because it's seen essays on the Copernican revolution, and it's seen other essays, and it's seen essays that are similar in structure. It knows what the structure is. It knows where to put nouns and verbs and this and that. So one of the other interesting and striking things about these on a technical level is that they're capable of what they call zero-shot learning in machine learning, which is also called zero-shot task specification, meaning that large language models are not trained to do one thing, like machine learning models historically before this were. This is the historical sort of rupture that these are. It's a very real category change, where before this, machine learning models were trained to do one thing. You trained a model to identify faces. You trained it on pictures of faces, right? You want a machine learning model to translate between English and Spanish. You train it on English and Spanish language corpora. However, what you have with these large language models is they're not trained with a function in mind. They're just trained to produce a representation of the language based on the data that goes in. And that's why you can do this zero-shot learning or task specification, which is when you put a prompt in, you are essentially zero-shot training it to perform a new output. And this is the historically exciting aspect of these, is they have this broader functionality. Historically, AI has always been distinguished by being narrow. Real AI is what's called narrow AI. The AI in science fiction is what people call general AI, or artificial general intelligence, which is something like human level intelligence. And now we have these models, which of course they still can't do everything. They can't drive a car. They can't play chess. They just are limited to language, but they are not task specific. And that represents a huge change in machine learning and in automation generally. And what's significant is that these things are now being positioned by the producers of them as infrastructure on which to build out apps on top of them. This is how they're being pitched, as a platform, basically, right? Like Google Cloud is itself a platform, but this will become a platform. You can build, just like you can now build an application that pipes in Google Cloud's face recognition software, or if you want to have an app that needs face recognition, you can buy that functionality and pipe it right in. And what, of course, the producers of these want is a situation where you want language generation capacities for your application or device or whatever. You buy that into their platform, pipe it in. So that is also historically novel. That sophisticated and automated language models available on an infrastructural basis. That's new. One more thing that's new about the technical aspects here is that large language models are a species of something broader that's being called foundation model. And this is a term posed by Stanford AI lab researchers in a paper from last year called On Opportunities and Risks of Foundation Models. Basically, foundation models, the term foundation refers to the fact that these models are not finished insofar as you train them up, but you don't specify what the job is until you put the input prompt in, and then you go from there. That's the finished thing. So foundation, it's the basis, but it's not the whole thing. Anyhow, the foundation model is a broader term to refer to this technique being applied to data other than just text, or multimodal foundation models. Research is being done on this now. So the same approach to these language models, but combining in-text, spoken data, even robotic manipulator data all together, and seeing how these data streams can be ran together in one model that, again, is not specified in its functionality. So you have literally unprecedented progress towards the science fiction notion of general AI based on this particular technique, and it being, when it moves beyond just being using language data. Long-winded. I apologize.
No. That was great, James. And one of the reasons why I think it's important to understand have at least a working understanding of the technical aspects of these tools is to sort of also understand that the term artificial intelligence itself can be quite misleading. And I think that the degree to which the term artificial intelligence is misleading is very pertinent to us educators, because it ties in with the values and the ethics that we as educators feel compelled to uphold. But also because I think that we need to understand what these tools cannot do and will likely really never be able to do, so that we can sort of get away from the hype, the marketing hype that these companies are obviously interested in for their bottom lines, and might distract educators from and policymakers that decide what educators ultimately teach, distract us from what needs to be done. So what I'm getting at, James, is so looking over these comments that folks have been sharing with us in the chat. I think everyone agrees, sort of like what we said from the beginning. We all want our students to be critical thinkers and to be creative and to have just a holistic development to them that'll allow them to participate in the world in a proactive way. What happens though, James, if you could give us your perspective, when tools that claim to be as powerful as OpenAI's, because OpenAI in their mission statement, if you go to their website, their open public mission statement is that they want to develop human-like intelligence. That's what they openly say.
Yeah, I think they actually say they want to solve intelligence, is their way they put it.
And they go even further, and they say that they want to produce these human level intelligence machines to outperform humans in most economic relevant activity. Mm-hmm. So it's just really interesting to know that they're not even hiding the fact that they believe that human intelligence can be replicated by machines, and that they want human beings to be outperformed by these machines. Mm-hmm. So what would be your perspective on what that sort of corporate image coming from a for-profit company, how does that play out in the education field, where educators who are actually working with their students, developing these skills, may suddenly feel pressured to use these tools or to interact with these tools, or at the very least acknowledge their existence and incorporate them somehow?
Yeah, huge question. Well, the first thing I'll say is that, I mean, to my mind, it is totally likely that more sophisticated versions based on this in the future will be more or less indistinguishable from people in their outputs. Like, they won't have a subjectivity, but in the output they generate, yeah, it's going to get better. And generally, machine learning models like this, they scale in the quality of their output. The more data you run at them, and the bigger network you run with more parameters that can capture more complex patterns from the data, the output usually increases. So there's no reason in my mind to believe that this approach will not continue to scale up. Like, we've only just seen it. And it can output a pretty convincing undergraduate essay at this point, based on my experiments. And I personally do not think human intelligence has anything in it that can't be emulated by a machine in principle. Whether this is the right technique to do it, probably not, but it might be a component of it. So what do I think? I mean, I'm not a skeptic on this approach that it could work, mainly. I think most people who say computers can't do that almost all of them have been wrong in the history of computers. Even the history of machine translation is a really great example. A recent example, people are familiar with this, but machine translation used to be done by linguists, right? They would build sets of rules, how to translate one language to another. And this approach has been completely scrapped by data-intensive machine learning approaches, where you just whack two identical corpora in two different languages together and let the machine learning figure out the patterns between them. That's how all Google Translate and all the automated translation systems now, they are all powered by this brute force statistical analysis, which can exhibit really surprising properties. So we don't know. That could be what's going on in the human brain, some sort of statistical level analysis that feels different to a person. Yeah, so what does this mean for when it's basically commodified? Well, so I mean, interesting fact about OpenAI too. I don't know if I thought I saw this in your notes, but I don't think you talked about it. But OpenAI started as a nonprofit, very interestingly, in 2015. And they were when they opened, they were called OpenAI because they had this commitment to making AI that was not produced by the tech giants. And in 2019, they entered into exclusive partnership with Microsoft because they could not afford the computing power necessary to train and run these seriously computation intense projects like this. So, and Microsoft now owns exclusive rights to the commercialization of anything developed by OpenAI. So the openness is not so open at all anymore. And it's a sort of parable, I think, for AI research generally, and for people who want to use AI research, is especially the cutting edge stuff, is that as it currently stands, that technology is extremely centralized in the hands of a few companies, and you're going to get it through them, more or less, at this point. There is one example to the counter case in terms of large language models, which is called Bloom. You might want to look that up if you haven't heard of it, if anyone's interested in an open source large language model. It's the big science, large open science, open access, multilingual language model. It's a mouthful. But this was produced by a bunch of volunteers, the startup called Hugging Face, which is committed to the actually open AI principles, and the French government, of all things. So worth looking into. I'm not going to talk about too much about it, but from a political economic standpoint, the big concern with relying on the private development of a technology is that the technology tends to be developed in certain ways, right? It doesn't take, a very radical perspective to acknowledge that if you have a technology being developed by private industry, that technology has to be profitable in the form that they develop it. Otherwise, they can't continue to exist. unless they have an alternate revenue stream, and they can do this as a side hustle sort of thing. But large language models are forming up to be a new axis of competition between the different tech giants, right? Google is now panicking because Microsoft / OpenAI broadside them by opening ChatGPT for free, and it was so so shockingly good that there's been some Google memos released recently, internal emails released about the company losing its mind due to this shocking display by one of their main competitors.
Right.
So this is becoming an axis of competition. Presumably, they want to compete for subscribers to subscribe to the competing infrastructures that they will offer on this. But
and in terms of education, James, sorry for sort of cutting you off
no,
here.
please.
But sort of in terms of what that competition might mean for schools and for teachers, Tim, maybe we could go back to you real quick, and you could maybe share with us how you would envision tools like ChatGPT being able to actually create the space that teachers are, because I think again in the chat, in the survey, from what we've been discussing, I think we all agree we all want to focus on critical thinking and creativity and higher order thinking skills. That's definitely what we all want. How do you see, like, it in a more sort of day-to-day sort of aspect? How does a tool like ChatGPT maybe help us get there?
Yeah, so what we're looking to do at the moment is we're just playing around with various prompts with the hope of getting a bank of prompts together that we can introduce to teachers. So we're playing around with various stuff. Only this morning, open up a YouTube video, 3 buttons, get the transcript, copy the transcript into ChatGPT and ask them to come up with 10 questions to measure understanding for a 14-year-old student within seconds. I couldn't even type it, even if it was it's that quick. It comes up with 10 questions around the age of a GCSE, a MYP4 grade 10 student level on knowledge and understanding of that video. So there's these ideas now that they can be introduced into activities to speed up, instead of a teacher now having to watch that video. Yes, a teacher, and it's critical that they understand and they have subject knowledge, of course it is, but if they can then save time there, come up with prompts, lesson planning, rubrics, all these things we've played around with. It's come up with set goals. Okay, you can put in a child's reading level and ask for 5 recommendations for books. Then that book, you choose one, come up with 10 questions on chapter 1. It will do all these things for you. I run an after-school 3D printing club, so I said come up with a scope and sequence for a 10-week, 1-hour-long 3D printing club for grade 5 students who have access to iPad and Tinkercad. Within seconds, it's done it. And then it was hard to read, so I wrote, please put in a table format, put in table format. It's put it in table format. Within seconds, I've got something. Was it perfect? No. But was it a much better entry point for me? I was reading somewhere, and it was a great quote. It was, convenience breeds innovation. And basically what it means is if you've got something that is quick and easily enters you into a conversation or enters you into a topic, you will be more inclined to push, to go further on that topic. So you have a student, instead of giving, we've done it before, you give a student a blank piece of paper, they'll stare at it for an hour. But if you can give them something, we're the same as adults, but if you can give students a little bit of a head start on a topic, because you've generated 5 prompts or 5 questions or a rubric through ChatGPT or other tools, it will then give students time to process things, to create things. So I think it can be used in that context. I think what we need to do and what we're trying to do is to get those banker prompts available. People tend to think people are just going to go in there and students are just going to create all their essays, create all their presentations. I hope students also, I mean, they need to play their part as well, especially the older students that are in our care. They start to realize that they're not actually learning anything. Yeah, you get to 17, 18, you can't just keep doing this. There's the idea that if someone listens to a lecture, it's like, was it 5%? You retain 5% of the knowledge. If you read something, it's 10% of the knowledge. If you discuss it, there's 50, and it keeps going up until you're actually doing something, creating something. You're retaining 80% of the knowledge. So students, I hope, okay, and we need to educate them on that. We need to say to them, look, when you come to 18, 19, 20, and you go into college, even on a personal level, you're going to have conversations with people. You're going to be in social events where you're in a circle chatting. You haven't got ChatGPT there, you know? So we need students to realize that this is a positive tool if used correctly, just like you would any other tool, actually. In the same that we talk about YouTube, how do we use to support teaching and learning? So I think, again, it goes back to one of those first comments I said at the very beginning. We need to look at it as another tool in the classroom. Just quickly then to end this bit, I would also have students presenting, talking, the idea of TED Talks. So I think those skills are going to be really important. Can you communicate? Can you share understanding? Are we going to have students defend essays? Are we going to randomly say to students, like, out of this class of 20, we will pick 5 students to defend an essay? So they're aware that this could happen. So I think we just need to think on our feet, think fast, and think creatively. And I think it can only be positive then.
Interesting. And just allowing me to sort of push back on that a little bit, Tim, just to be a little bit,
Please.
just to be a little provocative here. Do you think that the examples that you've just given, could they not be done without ChatGPT fairly easily with any number of tools that we currently have at our disposal?
I would say they could be done, definitely be done, but I think they can be done quicker with ChatGPT. Could I sit down, open up a Google Docs, create a column of 4 standards on one column, lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3 activity? I could definitely do that, but it would take me a good few hours to do it. I'll go into the CSTA coding standards, pull them in. I'll want the ISTE standards in there. All these things, it will definitely speed up. And then I can go in and I can do what I feel I'm an expert on and modify that for my children, for my students in my context then. But it would have definitely saved me time.
So if I can interject here,
please,
because the labor saving appeal is definitely there, and I see that. But from someone who teaches students at a university level, as the cost of education go up in most places, and most undergraduate students now have to work more than ever had before, had to work part-time jobs alongside their studies. The labor saving appeal for them is massive for this at the undergrad level, and so we're going to see that that labor saving appeal is going to be very appealing, and then just telling them if you need to get something out of your education. But of course, to many students, a bachelor's degree is just a necessary requirement society requires of you right now, right? And they need to get through it, and they need to survive, and then they have to go work at McDonald's or wherever the hell they have to work in the evening. So, you know, the labor saving is a double-edged sword insofar as it's going to be the same reason to plagiarize.
Would you say then, James, would you say that the way we're assessing is the problem? Would you say that we need to how's it looking in colleges and university then? Are students using technology like this daily?
Well, I mean, it's just happening, so it's too early to say as far as I know. But a thing, you know, I've been talking about with friends, we were joking like, well, we have to go back to the 1800s and the oral examinations for everything now, right? But of course, that's not feasible when you have a 150-person class, right? So that has a limited potential. And I was actually talking to someone who did a postdoc in Copenhagen, and there he was telling me that oral examinations, at least at the graduate level or upper undergraduate, they're still quite common there. They still use them, but of course, as class sizes grow at most places, it's more and more not an option to have everyone explain their essay to you orally. So I don't know.
I think, Tim, what I like about your question is I think it's a question we should be asking is the assessment practices that we have. If we know a kid can dump the assessment or whatever it is in ChatGPT and it spits out something, then is that really the type of assessment we should be working with? And I think James's, reference to oral, but I think I was listening to a high school English teacher, and she's been using it, and she's asked kids to ask ChatGPT to write in different voices, and then they print it out, and then they have a Socratic seminar around different approaches of voices and writing. And then they also then, based on the ones that ChatGPT has done, she asks them to handwrite a paragraph or two with their voice based on what they've learned about different voices. So that is something that I think is where the tool can maybe speed up some things, but also then give a platform for then you to focus on other skills that might be more essential or, require higher order thinking skills. So I think the assessment question's a good one. And what I'm noticing is the more I use it, the more I realize I have to get better at my prompts. Doing good prompts and getting what I really want, it just doesn't happen the first time. And so I'm realizing that I'm starting to develop a bit of a bank of what I need and what I want to get out. What is the language? What is the terms? How am I asking it? And what am I getting in return? Because a lot of stuff that I get in return, then I have to go back and I put it in a Google Doc and I rewrite it, or I look at it and I'm thinking, okay, that's not really what I want. And so that exercise in itself, I think, has been really helpful for me to understand what you were mentioning. And I think you guys are doing in your context is that getting prompts for teachers, a bank of prompts. So it becomes a tool.
We put together a Padlet, John, with like the different subjects and ways they can use it. So I'll share that with you.
Yeah.
I'll post it online. But it's interesting getting it, like you said, you develop the prompts. Now I love tables, so I'll go in and my first prompt is requesting something in table format. And then you said you were developing that, isn't it? So hopefully when we do actually formally, if you want to call it that, introduce it to teachers, we'll be able to give them some ways to use it.
And things like that, I think, will be very useful in terms of the practicality of how we could use these tools in the classroom. But to go back to that issue of assessment, because beyond the practicality of digital tools, the issue of assessment is important, and I think it's even more important when we're dealing with something as fundamental as reading and writing. And I think, again, we all agree on many things that are broken or probably fixable or improvable, to put it differently, in our current education systems around the world and in education practice. If there was something wrong with the way that we are assessing, say that and this is very important in higher education, but it's also important in high schools. For those of us who work in IB schools, we know how important the essay actually is. Essay writing is actually, I think the reason why it's been so important for so long is because it's a pretty demonstrably effective way of guaranteeing that you structure an idea correctly and that you communicate complex ideas in a way that allows you to share and impact the world around you. In other words, reading and writing, language in general, is probably the most important technology that human beings will ever have. And these tools that generate text and allow us to bypass the reading and the writing should we be talking? Is it a good idea that we're talking about replacing those kinds of assessments, Tim?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Those literacy skills now are going to be even more important than ever. And how are we going to not just assess them? How are we going to teach them? Will probably change. I think even now we're talking about assessment. So it's yes, it's crucial, but at the same time, how are we actually going to be? How is teaching going to change? When it comes to assessment, I'm big, and again, this is harder in James's context when you've got 150 students in a class, but that idea of relationships, you're in a class of 20 students, even if you've got 5 classes up to 100 over a couple of years, you get to know your students, you get to know what they produce. You have to take time to get to know what level they're at, be it with various, we do map assessments and things like that. So when a student springs something on you after 18 months, you know whether it's their work or not. And I think that's what we're going to have to do. It's much harder then, as you say, you move on up. We've had conversations around college entry letters and stuff like that been written by ChatGPT. We've shared with students that you don't want to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. We're in January, February this year, this technology is available, but come June, July, there are tools out there that can tell straight away whether this was machine generated, and your letter's sitting somewhere in a college and they're running all these letters through this and it comes up that yours is machine generated. I personally would love that, because if the system allows them to do it, so be it. But they don't want to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, that they're going to get penalized. So those relationships and communication, all those skills now that we've talked about, we call them 21st century skills, but they've been called that for 20 years. They're more important than ever. So how we then introduce that and how we add that to our class environment and stuff like that is more the question than how are we going to assess students, for me.
John, if we could get your perspective on what the prevalence and the increasing, because obviously these tools they're not going away.
I'm sorry to interject, but I actually have to cut out, Camilo. I'm sorry, I have to go at this point.
James, no worries. Thank you.
Terribly sorry. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, James.
Thank you for being here, James.
Yeah,
thank you so much. Be well.
All the best.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
So yeah, John, if we could maybe have your perspective on what you would see being the how should we approach assessment with what we know these tools will be increasingly capable of doing. What would be your take? What would you recommend leadership teams in schools do?
I think, what would be good is, for example, just something very concrete. You're a department in a certain grade level and you teach a subject. You take all the assessments that you work with for the year and pump them into ChatGPT and see what happens. And then based on that, you could say, okay, this is what I'm getting. This is what we might want to tweak. Maybe we don't use that assessment but how could we use gain that knowledge about the child's learning experience and learning growth by doing something else? I think it's really early right now to suddenly say this is going to replace everything or we all go into panic stations. This is February. This thing came out in December. How long has it taken us to get over screens? We're still fighting over screens, the internet, they're just the social media. I think we just need to give ourselves more time. I think it's really playing with it. And I think some of the things that Tim said are really critical is that, if you know your kids really well and you develop that relationship and you've had different assessments, you're going to quickly know what's theirs or not. I think, with ChatGPT, it's amazing, but it's not perfect. And I definitely, from my experience using weak prompts, I've gotten not the greatest response. And so my argument is that if you are worried about assessment, take all those assessments that you have, whatever their questions or maybe their situations or case studies, and see how, if a child used ChatGPT, what would be the output? How would you still manage that? How could you decide if this is something that's going to work or not for you? And how are you going to curate and choreograph a change in your approach with that, knowing that this tool is available to children? I think, that is something, getting a task force together in your school with parents and students. I think that's where we're going to learn much better, is when we, are willing to share, willing to not be tied to the past and look at it as something new, and reframing the way we approach assessment. This is easier said than done when you have the pressures of the IB and content-driven curriculums. And, it's now the mocks have taken place. IB exams are like 4 or 5 weeks away. Kind of hard to really delve into this and start shifting things. But I think there is a lot of worth in taking the time to really play with ChatGPT, put all those assessments, see what it comes out. What assessments do you do that don't work with ChatGPT, and kind of do an audit? That's what I would really would want to do. And that's what I'm starting to do. We're working with a PYP exhibition, and a couple of teachers and I are starting to just explore that idea. How can this help and how can this hinder? And what are some things we can do to mitigate the hindrances and also support the positives?
You touched on a really interesting point there, John. So, for instance, IB schools that obviously everything in the IB is heavily scripted. There isn't really a lot of room to breathe. It has to be done in a very specific way, in a very specific timetable. Given that, how much leeway do schools have in terms of, because we keep mentioning the urgency, and it's all over our Twitter feeds and in different news outlets and whatnot, this urgency of changing education and rethinking it in the face of these technologies. How much leeway do schools actually have, though, in terms of the curriculum they teach and how they assess and these other critical aspects?
Well, I think, I can only talk for international schools, but I think a lot of international schools are quite independent and they can do a lot. That said, yes, you could get rid of the IB or whatever. You might come up with a better version, whatever. But it's also, you have a community of parents. Remember, our parents, their point of reference is their experience of learning, which was very content-driven, exam-driven. And they are very successful in their careers and their professions, and that's their point of reference. So when they go into a classroom and don't see that, they're like, hold on, how do I know? How am I going to be able to measure the success of my child if I don't have my point of reference, which is an exam and content-driven pedagogy? There is no doubt that parents are becoming more comfortable with inquiry, with the MYP and the PYP, and there's less grading. But at the end of the day, to get into university, whatever you want to do, you need a group of numbers or something equivalent that measures you against a group of other people. And so I think there is a bit of a challenge if you want to break away from that. It's not that easy. Remember, the parents are your income and they're your customers, like it or not. You do have to think of them as customers, and they have written a contract with you by bringing their kid to you saying, I want my child to be successful, want them to be happy. And guess what? I want to make sure they get to a good university. That's kind of maybe the unwritten conversation that we have, but there is that expectation. So I think there is really some challenges to break away from that exam-driven mold, because university is still required. I think this is a whole other topic. What I think ChatGPT does is it elevates that conversation, the creative tension of that conversation. And I think, where we're going, there's still many conversations to be had, and I don't think there's any answer. But, I think just throwing out exams because now ChatGPT can answer all the questions, I think you have to be very careful, because there is that parent community and they're critical, and that's what we're there, is to support them and their children. And we need to understand what their point of reference is, which is a world of exams.
I'll
And
echo that as well, John. And you were in Asia as well, especially when I was in Asia. That was it. There was parents wanted to know. We would have families touring school who have yet had a child. It was that important education to parents that they were walking around the school expecting. I mean, they want to know, where's my child? What opportunities have they got come 18 and stuff like that. So it's hard when it comes. We're a counter, and then further up the school, you mentioned I love PYP, and you mentioned you've got the PYP project. It's the highlight of an elementary school. And that there's scope, isn't there? There's a bit more freedom. The MYP, a little bit more freedom, but as the students go up, it's almost we're accountable to universities. They want, as you said, numbers and stuff like that. I just want to highlight what something Santi said here in the chat around essays and the importance of focusing on the process of assessment, of an assessment. So instead of asking students, right, I'm guessing, write a 500 words, get it to me on Friday, make that a 2-3 month, 6 week, whatever process of them developing an essay. I think that's a great way of doing it. And whether there's options for some group work, are you going to present some of it so they can get really creative with it? So I think Santi's raised a good point there. That it isn't just bang 500 words, get it to me on my desk by Friday, but that whole going through the process of planning essays. How's it going to look? Who's your audience? What's your target audience and things like that? I just share, we had one student share work last week, and halfway through it said, in the opinion of a 14-year-old boy. So there's just one
Classic.
sentence in there. It was just like, okay, so we need to educate students on how to use this tool. Okay, but he was wise enough he knew that he had to write it in his voice, kind of thing. Which is, we laughed about it and he laughed about it.
That's great. That's funny.
that reminds me of the typical sort of plagiarism that we would see when we started wiring schools to Wi-Fi and having laptops and everything put in, and students would, of course, turn in, papers with the hyperlinks still active, and other sorts of things that would make it
Different
clear that it was obvious that they just took it from Wikipedia or whatever. But Tim, going back to the issue of parents and their expectations, there was a comment in the survey that I found really interesting. Someone mentioned that in private education and in the international education world, I suspect is what this person was referring to specifically, it's unlikely that parents would be willing to pay the tuitions that they pay for schools that automate a large part of what we've been talking about today. The sort of the planning and the feedback and all these other things, that there could be pushback from parents. They would say, we're not paying for this. We can't have these things automated. What would be your take on that? Well, obviously it's early days. We don't know, but what would be your gut impression on how much parents would be willing? And of course, there's cultural context. This will probably vary in different countries, but just in general, what would be your educated guess?
We only use these tools if they add value and they improve teaching and learning. If they don't, then we wouldn't do them. And then that comes down to communication with parents. We need to share with them why we're using these tools, because this is going to improve your child's experience in our care. If it isn't the case, then you wouldn't get that far. You wouldn't even be doing it with parents. You wouldn't just say, look, what we're writing. I mean, there's scope when you're writing reports. Well, if there is a system, be it a SIS or somewhere that's got all the students' grades, it's got all their comments and everything in there, that a report is generated off all of that, why not use it? Do you mean? So there's
Right.
these tools. We're living in a world where we're talking to chatbots all the time. We're talking to things like so that using that technology anyway. But it comes down, and it's a bit of a cliche, and sometimes people roll their eyes, but it's the why, isn't it? Why are we doing this? And it would be because it's improving your child's education. And if you're strong believer and you have some evidence and behind you to back that up, the majority of parents would be supportive of any use of technology. We use iPad because it does this. We use Google Classroom because it does this. We use Seesaw announcements because it does this. So again, it's all those tools that add value, and then it's communication, isn't it? Communicate.
Right, right.
And I agree with Tim. I think so often that's where the breakdown is. There's not clarity, or we are not purposeful in explaining what is the learning objective and outcome of the tools. And, you can say it, but also bring parents in, let them try. Have parents come in when you implement Seesaw. Let them see what the notifications look like. It's about really supporting people to understand. I think all of us, if we're confused about something or we're unclear, if we have somebody sit down and break it down in steps and make it clear, we usually are much better than to coming up with an opinion or a perspective or deciding if there's value or not. And I thank you, Tim, for bringing up. It's the communication. I can't agree with that more.
It makes us do our homework as well, doesn't it, John? If we know we're having to present this it makes us understand our systems, our policies, the tools we're using, even more so because we know we're accountable to parents.
Yeah. Camilo, I think some schools kind of experienced that during COVID. Parents were like saying, I'm not paying X amount of thousands of dollars
Definitely.
if everything is online. And, no parents actually left the schools, as far as I know, not in the context that I was. But I think it made us think, okay, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, is what is the value added proposition that we bring even to online learning? And, I think what Tim is saying is very clearly stating that is, what do we bring to the table? And we need to communicate that very clearly and support them with some, in-house hands-on experiences, parent evenings, have kids present. Nothing's more powerful when you get a room full of kids explaining their social media habits and how they manage it. I remember doing that with a group of kids, and parents were all worried that they didn't know much about security and settings. And they were blown away. These kids really knew what was going on, and they had actually a much better grasp of it than many of their parents.
I think it's Frankfurt. Is it Frankfurt tomorrow? It's now February the 1st. Frankfurt tomorrow having a session similar to what we're doing now with students. High school students are discussing this, and I think that you can sign it. It's on. I'll retweet it. I think Jamie, who I've known for a few years, he was promoting it. They're having students talk about AI, and I think it's amazing.
Yeah,
and so necessary to have everyone participate in the conversation. So we're running out of time. Concluding thoughts, Tim and John. What would be your 1 minute summary, your final words of wisdom for everyone? Tim, if we can start with you.
Oh, he's put me on the spot.
Really,
the technology isn't going away to begin with. I think we need to embrace it. We need to explore it. We need to give it the respect it deserves. And then look at ways, and I'm going to repeat it for John does, the added value. How is it adding value day to day, class to class, term to term? How is it adding value, I think? So I probably stole John's. I apologize.
No, not at all. No, absolutely not, Tim. Thank you.
John?
Yeah, I think, there's a bit of a panic. AI is kind of, we have all kind of sci-fi, and, there's this new movie about the doll, the sentient doll. There is a darker side to AI. And I think, we also need to realize that there are a lot of fantastic things about AI, and it's with anything, it's, we have to balance both and do our homework and, be critical and their ethical implications, and do due diligence and making sure that we're learning and sharing and engaging with our community and in this context with other educators. And this is going to, it's going to accelerate. There's going to be something ChatGPT 5. Who knows what comes next? But I think we, as I forget the gentleman's name, but he says, invite yourself to be a student of change, because that's the only constant that you will live. And I'll leave it at that.
Well said. Well said, John.
And it's not
Tim,
my quote, and I really, I need to.
Claim
I'm
it, John.
embarrassed.
Claim it.
No, I am not going to claim it, because if you give me 30 seconds,
It's
I
a lovely
will.
quote.
It's a lovely quote, and I really am mindful because, well, I know, Tim, you do amazing work, and I think it's always important to highlight who the person is. It's Anthony G. D'Angelo. He's the founder of Collegiate Empowerment, and it's become a student of change. It is the only thing that will remain consistent. And he's a gentleman that had a very bad experience going to college. And he has this organization called Empowerment to College. It's trying to get kids that maybe don't have the exam results or don't have the economic background to be successful. And he's done a lot of amazing work. And I've just been following him, and I love that quote. So credit goes to him.
well, on that note, John and Tim, thank you so much for having this conversation. I really appreciate your time and your insight. As we've said, these are really, really early days. And hopefully we'll be able to see more conversations like these in days ahead. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Camilo.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.